You got more light in your room, it seems like, John. More lighting.
It's the daytime.
I know. It
So
accentuates
a window can be open.
yeah, accentuates your blue eyes, your beautiful blue eyes.
What kind of a show am I on right now here, Patrick?
What kind of show do you want it to be, John?
I feel
Brian,
uncomfortable all of a sudden.
Brian, what kind of show do we have in store today?
Yeah, this is a historical ranking show. For those that are maybe new to the sport or new to kind of what we're doing, John and I have done shows like this for several years now. Many years ago, now it feels like he reached out to me and thought that he had some expertise and value. I gave him some tests. He passed all the tests, flying colors. And we brought him on a show with Sevan. I don't remember how long ago our first show was, but we generally have done shows here and there throughout the years, leading up to big competitions, kind of comparing the way that we evaluate CrossFit athletes around the world, especially at the top end of the sport. And I think that John and I have kind of different approaches to that, but often leads us into pretty similar scenarios. And then there's just like small nuances and differences, and that's what you're going to see throughout the show today. We are addressing the Madison era of the CrossFit Games. With the conclusion of the 2023 Games, there are no more CrossFit Games in Madison, Wisconsin. And the first CrossFit Games in Madison, Wisconsin was 2017. So we're specifically looking at the period of 2017 to 2023. We're not taking into account anything that happened prior to that. And even though there were obviously tons of off-season competitions, semifinals, at the athletes trying to make the games that didn't make the games and have all these other resumes, that is, we may make comments about it, but it's not the focus. This is in the 7 years that we had from the beginning to the end of the CrossFit Games at Madison, and we're going to talk about 2019 and 2020, which were a little bit different. How did the guys, and this show is about the men, next week we'll do the women, how did the men perform at the CrossFit Games in the years that they made it? Obviously, some of them are going to have 6 or 7 years of appearances there. Others will have 1, 2, or 3 years of appearance for a variety of different reasons. And John and I have each made a list of 30 men blindly. We did not see the rankings otherwise. We did have a conversation prior to doing that about who was eligible for the list, and kind of throwing some ideas back and forth about ways to evaluate or criteria that we were looking for. And if you are a big fan of what we do, then you might know that I do like all-time historical rankings for the men and women in the CrossFit Games. And for those, I have a minimum threshold that you must compete at least 3 years at the Games to even be eligible for those lists, just as kind of a baseline. Because as you're going to see today, sometimes there are athletes, and Ricky Garrard is an athlete in this era who has competed legitimately one time in the past 7 years, and he did great. But evaluating that against people who have 3, 5, 7, 9 appearances at the Games can be tricky. So if you do go back and look at the all-time rankings, you won't find Ricky Garrard on there. You won't find Mal O'Brien on there for the women's side because she hasn't made it to 3 games yet, et cetera, et cetera. So kind of setting the stage for what this is, and who John is. If you're not familiar with him, he does a ton of shows now every Wednesday night with Barbell Spin and Tyler Watkins, and he's a regular guest on Sevan's podcast. Great wealth of knowledge, and he's had some creative ideas this year also to help contextualize the state of the sport in terms of the top athletes in the sport. So laying the groundwork for that, I'm going to kind of pass it off to John and see how he can do here in terms of explaining why or what was different about 2019 and 2020 CrossFit Games and how he went about considering those when he was doing this from a big picture perspective.
Okay. I'm surprised you left that job to me.
I was tired of hearing myself talk.
And then I'm like, as we go through the list, I would argue probably the bottom half for sure, 15 through 30, very much so is because of how we value 2019, 2020 differently. There was a lot of guys that had 2 to 3 years where they made the games and were good at the games in this era. But all those years conflicted, right? Some were 2020, 2021, and some were 2018, 2019. Do you value that 2019 as much as you do the 2021 year? Probably not. But again, it's also not their fault that that's the year they competed. They can only go against what has happened. So I'll explain 2019, 2020 really quick for the new people. 2019, otherwise known as the Greg Glassman Games, got this idea to invite every top person in every country. So what that meant was there were basically 150 people that got to go to the games. In doing that, you had to have cuts, really big cuts, and the order of the events mattered more than in that year than any other year. And it's not. I feel like Dave, who made the events, was pretty hamstrung by like what he was able to do. So I don't think 2019 is his fault. It's just a very weird year. There were athletes who had their best years in 2019, 2020, and there were athletes who had their worst years in 2019, 2020. 2020 was COVID. So they had to string together an online CrossFit Games, and the top 5 people went to Carson and did the whole rest of the game. So online qualifier is wildly different than in-person competition. You can ask Brent Fikowski. He will tell you so himself. And so that's why those 2 years are weird. One's COVID and one's Greg Glassman. And then the 2019 cuts, they got down to top 10 after 6 events. And they didn't really test strength in those 6 events. And the cut that cut Vellner was a sprint event. Same thing with Brooke Wells, and it's because they stepped on the line. It's not even because they didn't sprint fast enough. I think in Vellner's case, he didn't sprint fast enough, but Brooke Wells would have made it easily if she didn't step on the line. And so that's why those years are weird. So if you made the top 10, and also the top 10 in the 2019 that got to do the whole rest of the games, it's pretty agreed upon if you did a whole games with the top 20, that half of the top 10 would have been replaced by other people. And that's, again, nothing against 2019 or the guys that made the top 10. But
well, especially on the men's side, I think it's helpful if people get just a picture. So these were the guys that got cut, the last 7 guys that missed making the top 10. Cole Sager, Travis Mayer, Sam Quant, Logan Collins, Chandler Smith, Pat Vellner, Lucas Hogberg. The top 4 guys at the end of the competition were Fraser, Olson, BKG, and Scott Panchik. No one's taken any issue with those guys being in the top 10. They all have regular and multiple top 10 appearances outside of 2019. The other 6 guys that made it through that year were James Newberry, Jacob Hepner, Matt McLeod, Adrian Moonweiler, Saxon Panchik, and Will Morad. I think every single one of them had their best finish ever in their career that year. And in some cases, it was dramatically better than any other year before, specifically Matt McLeod and James Newberry, the Australian guys. And so on the women's side, if you look at the similar thing, the names are pretty impressive, both sides of the list. But you have, Kristen Holta got second that year, her best ever finish. Jamie Green got third, best ever finish. Katrin, Tia, we're used to seeing them there. Carrie Pierce, Haley Adams, no surprises. Amanda Barnhart, 7th. She's had other 7th place finishes. Shadburn, one of her better years. Her story is a unique one. There was an athlete who failed a drug test. Turia Helgadottir had her best every year. And the women that they beat out it's a crazy list. None of these women got to do the last half of the 2019 games. Danielle Brandon, Annie Thorsdottir, Carolyn Prevost, Alessandra Pacelli, Laura Horvath, Brooke Wells, Sam Briggs, Emily Rolfe, Caroline Reason-Thibault, and Sarah Sigmundsdottir were the 10 women that got cut halfway through the competition. And I just, if you have a knowledge of the totality of the CrossFit Games, you just realize that the athletes in 11 through 20 that year that missed out on the 6 of the 12 tests that Dave put forward, probably, like John said, would have made big impacts and had a pretty different kind of trajectory throughout their careers if they've been able to finish out those CrossFit Games. The Get With The Programming guys have done evaluated the programming in totality for every year of the CrossFit Games, and I agree with them that in 2019 it was a well-balanced test, 1 through 12, but not everyone got to take the test. As John
1
said,
through 6 was not well balanced.
1 through 6 individually weren't well balanced, and the most important thing that John said, that is maybe could have got lost there, is the order of events mattered a lot. In the perfect case study of this is Matt McLeod and Annie Thorsdottir. Basically, Annie Thorsdottir did great on events 1 through 3 and not so well on events 4 through 6, and she missed the cut. Matt McLeod finished outside the top 40 in the first 3 events, but inside the top 7, I believe, on the events 4, 5, and 6, which weighed much more heavily, made the top 10, and ended up having a career year for himself that he was never able to replicate before or after. So those 2 years are difficult to evaluate. 2017 and 18 are 2 of the best years in the history of the games. John and I have talked about it. Bill and Chase have talked about it. JR and Taylor have talked about it. Those were awesome years. And they're the only 2 years of these entire 7 years where there were no cuts. Every athlete that made it there and didn't get hurt competed for the entirety of the games all the way through Sunday. That happened 15 through 18, and it pretty much hasn't happened otherwise. So if you were becoming a fan of the sport at that time and then cuts caught you off guard in 21, 22, 23, then you need to kind of look further back. So cuts are a controversial thing in general. But when we're looking at the entire spectrum of Madison, we have 2 years, no cuts, 17, 18, really competitive, good years, great results. 19, 20, we talked about outlier years, 1 per the instruction of Greg Glassman, 1 as a method that they could use to salvage a season in light of a global pandemic. 21 was a strange year in and of itself because half of the qualifiers took place online and half of them took place in person, just based on where different lockdowns were. So you did have some athletes who made it to the games for their only time that year and haven't been able to make it since in person. 2022 and 23, I would say, along with 17 and 18, are pretty straightforward. The only differences being that there were some cuts at the games those years. Fair enough.
Yeah, and I will say, if you made the top 5 in 2020, I value your top 5 finish. So, like, I think it's a legitimate. And I know it's only 5 guys, but all 5 of them made the qualifier and they did a whole games. It's not like, for instance, so like I would say a regular games year, I value the most. 2020, I value the second most. In 2019, I value the least most. But I still value it. I think when I looked at your rankings when you posted your post, it looks like I value it way more than you do. It looks like you just disregard 2019 altogether. And I mean, they still did that year. And I think, for somebody like James Newberry, and we'll get into it more, but that was his fittest year. It was his peak fitness. And I'm not saying a whole test he'd get 5th, but he might have got 10th. So it's still worth something. It's just not as good as a regular games year. Okay, and with that, we can move on to the.
Yeah, so basically, I don't know, 2 weeks ago, I pulled the stats, finishes, average finish, whatever, over this time period for the 40 men that I thought were most likely to be in the top 30. I sent them to John. Of course, he had the option to do his own research and to pick any other people that he wanted. But like I said, we're usually pretty consistent, at least with the names, and then the placements can be a little bit variable.
Okay.
And so, Patrick?
No, go ahead. Finish.
Okay. Okay. And that was it. I just sent him a list alphabetically with the stats for 40 men, and we went our own ways and made our predictions. This week, I've been rolling out in 3 different installments my own rankings, but I do think that there's a lot of value in having conversations about this. And I hope that what you guys see throughout the next however long we're doing this is that John and I both spend a lot of time getting to know these athletes, trying to evaluate and compare their performances over a period of time, and that there are different ways to look at them. Both are good, and what we're going to try to do is settle on some things. So when we have small differences, we're going to try to come to some kind of agreement or compromise, and we may or may not be able to, and Patrick will be the deciding vote.
Yeah. So before we start, you guys just puked up a bunch of word salads there. I kind of wanted to point out some of the names that are notable names not on this list. And like you said, Brian, there was this easily could have been a list of 40, but if you do 40, then it just ends up, you end up repeating the same things for each athlete. So some of those notable names: Colton Mertens, Henrik Haapalainen, a personal one that I think probably should have been top 30, but maybe the reason why he didn't make it is because of his recent drug failure, is Jason Smith, Lucas Eslinger, Frederick Egidius, Royce Dunn, Samuel Cornier, Alex Vigneault, Roy Gamboa, Sean Sweeney, Alexander Caron, and Oldus Upenix. Those are some notable names that you will not see on the top 30, but probably could have easily been in the top 40. That kind of leads us into, just right off the bat, number 30. So for number 30, excuse me, number 30, John had Alex Anderson, and Brian had Adrian Moonweiler. Now, Adrian Moonweiler is someone that John completely omitted from his list of 30. Meanwhile, Alex Anderson is tied with the Chandler Smith pick with the biggest differential between picks between John and Brian in terms of there's like 8-spot difference. So let's start with number 30. John, Adrian Moonweiler wasn't on your list. Why?
I think he was. I'm pretty sure I even asterisked and said he would have been 31st on my list.
Yeah, Cornier as your 31st.
Okay, all right.
30 seconds.
30 seconds. Oh,
30 seconds.
It's the same thing at that point. So I went and grouped like the bottom 15. I think we'll disagree on way more than the top 15.
Well, just for people to, if you haven't looked, in the different order, John and I had the same 15 guys, 1 through 15 in some order. And so that, obviously there were some differences in placement, but it was I was actually surprised by that. I'd say pleasantly surprised. And 16 through 30, we have some differences, which is what Patrick's highlighting now.
I went by groupings on my top 30. So for instance, once I got to say Lazar, then I had who had elite 2 years. And then I had 3 people that, were shown across, but they were 10 through 15th, consistent years, but you're never really in that top 10. And then I had 9 guys that had 2 really good years, and they are in the order that I put them in. For instance, Nick Matthew was 7th and 19th or something like that on his years.
14th and 19th.
14th and 19th. And I considered that better. And Nick Matthew in 2022, 2023, I considered that better than Alex Anderson's 8th and 13th in 2017, 2018. I do think the field is fitter. I don't think the top of the spear is fitter, but I do think the field gets fitter every 5 years. Every subsequent year that we continue on the CrossFit Games. And so I don't value them more, but I put them in the same category. And then I just chose Nick Matthew over Alex Anderson. They're really close. Like all of these guys are close, right?
Well, for Brian had Alex Anderson at 22nd as opposed to 30th for you. So again, that was the biggest variation, tied with Chandler Smith. So in terms of 8 spots. So,
well, it wasn't. The biggest variations are the fact that I have Ben Smith and Jay Crouch on my list at 18 and 19, and he didn't include them at all.
Now,
and I'm
Jay Crouch, I'm going to say that I missed. Ben Smith, I'm rocking with it. All right, I know he had 7th and a 12th. 2019, he had a pity vote. He didn't even get to go. They gave him a wild card.
John, but in a vacuum, take that out of the equation. His 7th and 12th is 1 spot better both years than Alex Anderson.
Right, and so I have Alex Anderson 30th, and then Ben Smith is around the same thing.
But you have to have Ben ahead of him. They competed 2 years against each other, and Ben beat him in both years.
I gotcha. I don't. I value Alex Anderson in the Madison era more than Ben Smith. Ben Smith owned the Carson era. On the Madison era, who you think of more?
The Carson era has nothing to do with it.
No, I realize that. But what I'm saying is, who I think of more, Ben Smith was on his way out. Alex Anderson was still. I know he's got the similar placements, but I think of Alex Anderson more than I think of Ben Smith. And when you're on the 30th spots, like these guys are together. You know what I mean? It's just basically just pick who you want your favorites to be.
This is actually a great, Well, this is a great place to start because you guys hear what John's saying is mostly that he's valuing the years closer to now, higher than years that have been gone past. So he's saying a 14th and 19th and 22 and 23 is better than a 7th and 12th or an 8th and 13th from 17 and 18. And I'm disagreeing with that. When I look back at Alex Anderson or Ben Smith in this case and their performances there's only one person in either year that beat either one of them that isn't on this list, and it's Rasmus Anderson, who had a career year in 2018, finished inside the top 10. And the rest of these guys are like that year that Ben Smith was 7th and Alex was 8th. The only people that they lost to were Fraser, Frykowski, Vellner, Olsen, BKG, and Scott Panchik. Like, that's an
The
incredible
lower
list.
you go on the list, though, the less like the top. I agree with you.
But they're beating athletes like Koski, Jason Smith, who Patrick mentioned, Logan.
You think
Collins,
a 2017
Mayer.
Alex Anderson gets 8th place in 2023? I don't.
It's impossible to say.
No,
I'm
say what you think, though. I know it's impossible. What do you think? You think Alex Anderson, 2017, if you could just drop him, he'd get 8th in 2023? Absolutely not. The skills that they have to do now, no. And everybody's stronger.
You've already said about 2019 and 2020 that it's not the athlete's fault. All they can do is show up and compete. I'm valuing the performances in 2017 and 18 more highly than you. That's all that I'm saying, and I can't convince you to do that otherwise.
No. I mean, it's fine that he's there, and he could be there. I could be wrong. Like, we can put him wherever we want to. We could side with you on this. That was my reasoning why they are this low.
So do you think Jay Crouch should be on the list?
I do. I think I just missed Jay Crouch. I saw his this 22 and 28, and then I just didn't think anything of it. His 8th place puts him on the list for sure, and I just dropped the ball on Jay Crouch.
Well, I will say with that debate with Ben Smith that I will side on the side with John by having him. I wouldn't have him off the list all completely, but I probably wouldn't have ranked Ben Smith as high as Brian did, because Brian has Ben Smith at 18th. Where if what Brian says is true, which it is, that Ben and Alex have similar career paths in terms of 2017, 2018, he's weighing those way too highly as opposed to in comparison to what he has Alex Anderson is. But Brian did also weigh Alex Anderson's finishes those 2 years pretty higher than John did as well.
For sure.
Yeah. And a good example is, like, because I did similarly to you, John. I tried to group some of the athletes. So I saw other athletes that had 2 years and what I'll say is relatively similar performances, like Dallin Pepper, a 19th and a 5th in the last 2 years, seemed very similar to me to an 8th and a 13th from Anderson in the previous years. Mm-hmm. But you're giving Pepper 10 spots more credit than that.
Than him over who?
Over Anderson. So you're saying that the 19th and 5th in the last 2 seasons is substantially better.
I think Dallin Pepper's 5th place in 2023 is wildly more of an achievement than 8th in 2017. Absolutely.
Is that based on the quality of athletes those seasons, or the programming, or both?
No, I don't think you can argue the programming. I think 2017, 2018 were some of the best years in CrossFit, and I agree with that. And I think if you take the top 3 guys in 2017, 2028, or 2018, you can put them in 2023 and they'll be fine. Like, I think they'll be right around where, if you could do that, I think they would be. I disagree that Alex Anderson would be. I think you put 2023 Dallin Pepper in 2017, he's in it for the podium. But like at the top of the spear, the lower you go on the list, the less the field is going to be in 2017, 2018. I'm not saying that those years, because I think the top has not gotten that much fitter.
John,
what I'm saying is the 20th places, those guys are fitter or less fit. They don't make a difference in 2017. Zeke Grove can't make the games now. Or they would. I'd like those type of people that make the games in 2017, 2018. They can't make it now because the field is fitter.
They've reallocated the spots, so there's a lot less opportunity in Oceania than there was back then. In light of your perspective that you've laid out here, explain to me Guy Maeros in 21 with a 7th and a 10th. I mean, I'm assuming you're not really factoring in too much 48th
than Alex Anderson, right?
Yeah, you have him 21st.
I just don't have him near as high as you do.
No, I'm not.
That side?
Yeah, you guys had a 5-spot difference between Guy. Obviously, Brian had Guy at 16th, and John had him at 21st.
You think the 7th and the 10th that Guy has is more impressive than Travis Mayer like making the games 5 years, all split around, or 6 years, all split around, and getting 10th to 15th the whole entire time?
12th to 19th. Super good question. And I have them ranked one spot apart. We actually had Travis Mayer exactly the same rank at 17th, which was kind of cool.
Travis was one of 5 people you guys agreed upon at the same ranking, by the way. So 5 out of 30, you guys pretty much got dead on. So congrats.
Yeah, but Fraser doesn't count.
Share the brain. Share the brain.
So,
well, and
okay.
it's one of these things. I think that kind of there's this other element of this conversation is like, when do they stand out in your mind? And it's like Travis Mayer I know how great Travis and how consistent he is, but Guy Maieras had 2 years where he was stealing the spotlights. He was stealing the show, and he wasn't just having top 10 finishes. He was having event wins, these big moments, these iconic memories. And I think to some extent, that's of course.
So because Gee's best quality is that he's strong, he deserves to be over everybody that
and
has
fast.
two event placements.
Power.
Those are really strong. Like, to me, those are really strong 7th and 10th place finishes. They're more memorable and iconic than Lazar Djukic's 9th, 8th, and 9th place finish.
See, I look at Lucas Hogberg, and you look at something like 2-stroke pool, and to me, that's just as memorable. I know it's not. I know it's not as memorable for everybody else because everybody likes to watch the heavyweights lifted. But like, if lifting is your greatest thing, like when Geese snatches 305 and wins, in my head, he's supposed to do that. I'm not amazed by it. He's supposed to do it. And like when I like something memorable is Jackie Dahlstrom's sandbag because she's not supposed to do that. I'm not amazed by Danny Spiegel lifting more than everybody. That's what you do, right? And Lucas Hogberg got 3rd place, podiumed, and he's made the games twice, right? He's what is he, 3rd and 17th or something like that? Third and 17th. You value Geese 7th and 10th over Lucas Hogberg's podium placement in a normal year, and then 17th.
Yeah, I mean, that 17th just sucks. Like I wrote about it in the
it's
article.
7 spots different than 10th.
No, I mean, I don't mean it's a bad performance. I mean, it sucks because I was really excited after 2018 for Lucas Hogberg and to see how good he actually was, or if that was a fluke. And we never really got to find out if he would have been able to get it back into the top 10, hunt for a top 5 in that next year or not. And so it's like, I feel like kind of empty when I think about Lucas Hogberg. Like, I just don't know. And when he didn't make it the year before in 2017, and he pretty much stopped trying after 2020. So we have a super small sample size. He's the lowest ranked podium finisher that either of us have. You have him 1 spot higher than me at 19 compared to I have him at 20, which I was actually.
In relevance compared to Guy is what I'm saying. Guy's 7th and 10th to me is not as impressive as Lucas Hogberg's podium placement and then 17th. Guy could not podium if he dreamed of it, if he ate trying to podium every single day. He couldn't even fathom it.
Yeah, and it's another just a great example of where you place the value of the performance. So and I think that you've said now multiple times, like, this podium performance from Hogberg weighs heavily. This 5th place finish from Dallin Pepper weighs him heavily. Jay Crouch's 8th place finish on its own should have gotten him a spot on the list. I just overlooked it. So, and I think that's good for people to see because it's been cool, the comments that people have been weighing in with, that some people really, really value 1 or 2 top end performances, and other people appreciate the duration of a career. And then
you can't argue that with Guy, though. They both got 2 years. You're not counting 48th on 2019. I'm asking specifically about Guy.
Yeah, and I'm not, and I'm basically what I'm saying is, the consistency against the quality of field in those 2 years I thought was excellent and slightly better than 1.5 years of Hogberg. Yes.
7th and 10th is better than a podium. I would never agree with that. 7th and 10th place is better than podium, and then 17th. It's not like 17th is that far off of 10th.
No, but it's goes back to what you said. But it goes back to what you said earlier. Is that
you asked Bukowski who he thinks is more impressive?
Well,
I wonder who he says. Like, really, just think about, like, there's absolutely no way that Gee is ahead of. They had the same amount of years if you don't count 2019. He got 48 in 2019, so it's only going to count against
But
him.
Lucas
if you do count
Hogberg's
that.
17th was from 2019, so you either have to count
So
him or
he's
not
2 for
count
2
him.
in years ahead of Gee.
Well, there's 3 versus 2 in that scenario, but yeah, he has the. Well, I mean, I don't know if you want to put it that way. Then they have 5 appearances. Lucas has the best finish. He has the next best too. I mean, and his top 2 finishes add to 17,
But
and Lucas is
no,
add to
so
20.
they
The
got to
average
go
finish
head to
is
head.
better.
This is what I'm saying. They got to go head to head one time, 2019. Lucas was better. And then in the only other year that he did it, he got 3rd place. And he
Lucas
got
was better.
7th and 10th.
That year, Elliott Simmons was fitter than Jeff Adler. That year, you're not even going to believe that. You can't make this
No,
argument.
I'm not arguing. I'm
Say
not
that you're going to
arguing
compare one spot on the
2019.
leaderboard.
But
Tim
when that's
Kelsey
our
got
only
cut,
spot,
Aiden Brown got cut, Street Horner got cut in the first workout. Gabby McGowan got cut. It was a joke of a year. Yeah, it's really difficult to assess.
no, I agree with you. I'm not arguing 2019, but they both took the same test. And I'm just saying
They did
only
not
other
take the
data
same
point.
test.
The only other data point they got cut around the same time. He got 2 more events. That's not.
I think he actually got cut because there were some drug failures after 2 events, or maybe it was the ruck. But it's like you program the ruck and you talk about the importance of events. If that ruck, Lucas Hogberg won it.
Yeah,
the ruck
no.
run is the worst thing that Geese could ask to be programmed.
No, I bet Hunter McIntyre was the most jealous of Lucas Hogberg in that moment because he could have rode that all the way to 17th place too. I
watched from about 20 feet away as Hunter McIntyre failed his handstand walk by 1 or 2 feet 5 times in a row. It was
brutal.
But anyway, that's the nature of that year. So overall, I think yes, Patrick.
I have to agree probably with Brian on this because the only reason why I would agree is just I kind of look at the event wins and the quality of wins that Guy did it. I mean, he's a power.
Yeah, I look at the quality of your final placement, and that guy was on the podium with a little Swedish flag, and that counts for more than anything that Guy has ever done in the games. And you could ask any elite athlete, they would give this to Lucas Hogberg hands down.
Yeah, but then how are you? But are you going to make this argument for Will Morad being higher than Guy Maieros then? If you want to talk about a great performance being the thing that's a separator, Guy's second best performance.
Well, Morad's got 4 games appearances. This is 2-2 in my eyes.
Guy has 3.
I don't. If we're not counting 2019,
well,
then they have 3 and 2. And Guy's performances are 7th and 10th compared to a 14th, a 20th, and a 22nd. And you have to weigh the 7th and 10th higher based on everything you've just said.
Yeah, Lucas Hogberg should be ranked higher. I agree.
Guy should be ahead of Morad, and Hogberg should be ahead of Morad on your list 100% with everything.
Well, they're 1 spot apart. Yeah, you're right. We can switch them on my list. I'm with it.
We need to drop Morad down. We need to move Guy and Hogberg and Pepper up.
Well, you need to move Guy way down.
Let me throw a name in there and see where you guys, what your opinion is. Chandler Smith. So based on your thinking, John, do you have Chandler Smith ahead of Lucas, but you have Lucas ahead of Guy? Why?
With that, I looked at 4 different games appearances and when you want to make the argument about 2019, 2020, and it's so annoying that has to be there.
Yes, I agree.
I'm with that's the argument that has to be made.
Sure.
But I just looked at his 4 games placements and he's like a roller coaster, right? He's 15th, 6th, 21st, 7th. Yeah. But his 7th place for me in 2023 almost solidifies his 6th place in 2020. If you have another place beyond the next years and you're still doing the exact same thing, it almost kind of says I was that fit that year. It's not a fluke, right? Like James Newberry. It's not a fluke like Matt McLeod.
Do you dismiss 2021 then? It sounds like you're putting more weight on 2020 than 2021.
No, because those were just the years that Chandler was there. Chandler was, he was 21st in 2021. He got 15th in 2019. They're around the same spot. I'm saying that's where that guy is at in that time frame.
Sure.
He didn't in 2022, and then 2023 got 7th.
Well, again, you guys had an 8 point, an 8 spot difference. Brian, why Chandler Smith so low on you had Chandler at 24th, and
Yeah,
John having
I
that.
mean,
He for dang sure's ahead of Gee. That's all I know. Like there ain't no way Gee's ahead of Chandler Smith. You have the same highest placement. Chandler's 2023 and Gee is 2021, and then 10th place at your other one. Chandler's got 3 other games appearances. I know you're not going to count that 6th, but that is ahead of 10. And then he's got 2 other games appearances than Gee. I don't know how you don't count Chandler ahead of Gee. Because Gee can freaking snatch weight. Like, it's not hard to do that.
Well, if he's the best at doing it, then it must be harder for everyone else. But Chandler Smith is probably the biggest. He's the biggest culprit of the cuts during this era that we've seen, and it's really a shame. Is that we never.
Culprit?
Yeah, he missed.
Explain.
I mean, he's amongst the guys that got cut on the last cut in 2019. So we only got to see him do half of the games. He missed making the top 5 of the 2020 games by 1 spot. So we didn't get to see him do any live competition that year. And then he was the first guy who missed the last cut the following year. So 3 years in a row, he's cut halfway through the competition. And I'm thinking he's in the prime of his career at this time. And I have no idea how good he actually is. And I look at those performances and I'm just like, it's similar to Lucas Hogberg in 2019. I just feel empty. I feel like I never got to know how good this guy was. Yes.
How did Gee do in 2023? I felt empty about his performance. I just don't know why you have him ranked so high. He's like my most egregious pick by you in this whole entire list. I'm sorry, I will stop harping on it, but there are so many people better than him on this list.
And Gee isn't outside of this list. Gee is an interesting case study in general. That is, he creates a polarized response. Some people think this guy has the potential to win the CrossFit Games, think he's the best thing that's ever happened to CrossFit, and they're diehard Guimayeros fans. A lot of other people are on the other side and take the perspectives that John has taken. And I've never really spoken to many people who are in the middle on him. So for one reason or another, people go both ways. I thought that the 2-year run that he had in 2021 and 2022 was extremely impressive and should be recognized as being such. And I have him kind of in the middle of the list here. I could consent to dropping him down to around 20th where you have him, but definitely not any lower than that.
I'm fine with that.
So okay, I think based on...
Do you want to switch Luke Berg and Will Morad? The argument you've made for Luke Hogberg, I agree he should be ranked higher.
I think that based on the conversations we've had on the bottom half of this list, we can, we can probably say that maybe we put Gee closer to 20. We'll make sure that Hogberg is ahead of him. Maybe we'll bump up Chandler Smith. Maybe we'll kind of middle Chandler in that 20th range as well. And we'll drop Morad below those guys closer to where I had him.
Yeah, I'm good for putting Jay where you have Jay. And then like basically middling Alex and Chandler, since that's where our biggest separations were, and then everybody else kind of fill in from there.
So before we move on to the top, I guess 15, 2 other names I want to bring up that had some discrepancies was Tim Paulson, where John, you had Tim Paulson at 24th, and Brian had him at, where'd you have him at, Brian? You had him at 29th. Not a huge jump, but a huge discrepancy. I mean, it's one of the bigger. It's a 5-spot discrepancy. Obviously, John valued him a little bit more than Brian did, and then also Jason Hopper. Hopper, you had at 27, Brian, and
and I think
John
this is a
23rd.
I think Hopper's the easier one to identify. John's obviously weighing that 7th place very high, and I'm kind of looking at Hopper in a 3-year window, and I'm saying I still don't know. I still don't know who this guy is. I think I wrote in the article if we had stopped at 2022, I'd have him up exactly where John has him, basically where Dallin Pepper is. But I do also have this third data point of 31, and I think I'm actually really glad you brought up Hopper, because we've been trained as fans of the CrossFit Games to break ties based on the best performance, right? If John and I are tied on points at the end of the competition, but he has 2 event wins and I have 1, he takes it. So we're trained to look for that best thing. But we know inherently that if John had the best performance and we ended on the same points, he probably also had the worst performance. And we're not conditioned to look at that. And when we're taking a look at the totality of their performances over the period of time that they competed, then I think that, you do have to consider some of those bad performances or lower performances as well. And so when I see Jason and I see this kind of, you talk about a roller coaster, it's up and down over the last 3 seasons, it's confusing to me, and it diminishes a little bit that 7th place. So
I don't disagree. I don't think he could take a year off. And I feel like that's kind of what he did. He made the games and like almost just took it off.
Yeah, and he ends up missing half the competition that year, which is also like kind of a bummer. Tim Paulson is, I think, the only athlete I had outside of the top 15 with 6 qualifications during this time. So he qualified every single year that he tried to make it. He didn't try to make it last year. He competed on a team. They did quite well. And, but he has these he was 105th in 2019. He's bad at legless rope climbs, and he got exposed in event 1, and his CrossFit Games was over. He competed online the next year as 14th, which is his just best ever finish. But it's like hard to really value that as a really
can't
good
think
finish.
very highly of it. Yeah.
And so you basically look at the other 4 finishes that he had, 19th through 29th is the range of finishes there. And I was basically like, I don't think that he's done, his performances have not been good enough to be in the top 30, but his excellence over the period of time was better. Like that was better than any of these other guys in the bottom 15 or the guys that I left out of the list. And I wanted to include him because of that, but I couldn't justify putting him, very high.
Moving on to 15 through 10. It's kind of funny. You guys had Saxon both at 15 and you both had Koski at 10 to bookend these picks, and everyone in between you just swapped. So I mean, if there's anything notable to talk about that, I think the biggest thing would be, I guess the biggest point of contention with this would be Ricky Gerard. Technically, according to CrossFit, he's only competed at the games once in Madison during this time, but we know physically he's competed twice. How much of the 2017, what we saw Ricky Gerard, how much of that did you use, even though it didn't technically count towards this ranking, or are you basing it on his potential?
You want to go first, John?
It's up to you.
I mean, Ricky's, Rick. I called John specifically because of Ricky, and I said, "Hey, are we gonna allow people to rank people on this list that have only competed at the games once during the entire era?" And he said, "I think we have to. How could you imagine the story of the Madison era of the games without Ricky Gerard in it?"
Sure.
And he's right. We mentioned that Hogberg is the lowest ranking athlete that made a podium that either of us have on our list, and that was, and Hogberg making the podium that year. I think both of us could say, we still don't know. We still don't know if that was a fluke, if he was really that good.
I do think it was fluky. I do think it was fluky. I think he got lucky with the programming for sure. He still did it.
But we don't feel that way about Ricky. We don't feel like his third place last year was a fluke. We both think that if he had not broken his shoulder last year, he would have been in the mix to potentially win the games or take a podium spot at worst 5th place. And we pretty much think that outside of Rogue, which he's not been shown to do very well at, that any competition he goes to right now, he's a candidate to make the podium and possibly to win. And so while I mentioned in the onset that we're really trying to limit ourselves to what happened in the CrossFit Games during the years that they made it, he is an exception where it's like, I mean, if you're only talking about that, then maybe it should be in the top 10. He's, but I didn't feel right putting him in the top 10. It doesn't look like John did either.
Well, it's not what's he going to do in the future either. He had one very solid 3rd place where he was the 3rd fittest guy there, and then he got hurt. We can't count the year that he got hurt. And then 2017, if you want to count it as like a half a year for him, like he's in my head, like I looked at all the guys with the top 2 finishes, like 2 really, really great years, maybe 3 pretty good years. Like Lazar's got 3 solid years, but nothing's amazing. I put him above all of those people. And then for you to get over Ricky, you'd had to have like a solid career throughout, unless you're Roman. And I just think Roman's better. But like you had to be sprinkled
I mean, but
around
Roman has
all of them.
I mean, Roman has a better resume.
Right. You know, he's just better. But I'm saying like of all the guys that he would be in question with, I just
Right.
put him above all the 2-year wonders.
Yeah, and the only person that you have higher than him that I didn't was Scott Panchik, and I don't even think it's worth like it's splitting straws at that point. You know, everyone, I think everyone's familiar with the story of Scott Panchik's career. He's I would still say he's the fittest guy that's never made the podium. He's been close. He's had 4th, 5th, 6th place finishes like crazy. And the fact that he finished 11th in 2021 on half of a knee, and that's when he got his only 2 event wins of his era, is potentially the most impressive result of any of these, even though it's tied for his lowest finish in the Madison era of the games.
I also think that the Scott Panchik story, it's kind of sad in terms of like the 2020 season where he decided to compete on a team with Mayhem, where kind of that was taken away from us. Because if he knew that was happening, he probably would have competed as an individual, and he probably would have finished in the top 10. And then 2022, where he unfortunately got hurt, and unquestionably, if you had talked to Scott that year, Scott said that was probably the fittest he'd ever been because he cut back on his volume. And he was technically retired, but you know, we were kind of deprived, or kind of those 2 seasons taken away from us regarding Scott, and it would have been nice to see how he would have performed those 2 years, because he probably would have moved up the list considerably if we would have saw a full season out of those 2 years. So moving on, we're not going to spend too much time on 8 and 9 because obviously you guys swap Roman Krennikov, you had it, and Sam Kwan were 8 and 9 for both of you. Let's kind of dive into the whole Jeff Adler. I'm going to kind of skip. We'll go back to BKG and Olsen, but let's talk about Jeff Adler. Brian, you have him at 7, and John, you have him at 5th.
Mm-hmm. So I think this comes down to what do you value most? Do you value longevity in the era? Do you value, being in the era of all 7 years? Or 7 or 8, Brian?
7 years.
If you value being in the era the whole 7 years, or do you value winning? And I value winning the legitimate CrossFit Games, like coming in first. You're the fittest man in the world. I value that over everything. I think that should be weighted the heaviest. If you are the fittest man in the world, then you should be ahead of almost everybody. Like, it's really, like, I think that should be weighted so heavily. Even like for instance, like if it's just 1 year, like in 2020 and 2023 was Jeff's only year that he won. But he was still in it. He did 4 years, right? So, and that's why I valued him so high, because I value winning more than
5
longevity.
years. 5 years.
Are we counting 29? I thought it was 5th, 13th, 5th, and 1st.
33rd in 2019. I mean, we have to there are 7 years
2019.
that happened.
You can't.
Yeah, I know. But it's good. It's worth mentioning.
And I think Brian values longevity more than I do, and I value winning more than he does. I think when it comes to really our top 5.
Yeah. And I would say top 7, because that's where I have.
Yeah, top 7.
But actually the cool thing over the last 24 hours is that the people who have bothered to make comments on the post with our picks are also fairly split on that. And you'll see a back and forth in the comment section when people are saying like, dude, Medeiros has 2 wins. You have to factor that. Adler's got a win. You can't discount that. Like, it's worth something. You see other people say, yeah, but these guys, BKG's made it every single year, and he's in the top 10 every year. Look at Vellner, 4 podiums and all this other, and so you see that people do put emphasis on different things. And that's why I think that it's valuable to have these conversations and to kind of have that back and forth. And in the case of Adler, I mean, Adler's, he was a rookie at the games in 2019. I was super excited about him then. I had already known him in Caroline. I'd had a conversation with him prior to that year. We had a lunch or something, and they knew the system. They were very smart, and they're like, we'll see how long we make it. And they kind of bowed out before we ever got to know anything from him. In 2020, he sneaks in. Like, he was not one of the people that anyone was picking to make the top 5, and he goes there, and he did get an event win on the CrossFit Total, but he finished last out of 5 guys. And it's like, how do you value that 5th place finish? like relative to a normal year. It's not a last place finish, but it's not a fifth place finish. And you look at the guys that beat him, and it's like, I mean, where would Sam Quanta finish in a normal year that year? We have no idea. Noah Olson, we have no idea. We didn't know anything about Justin Madera. So it wasn't even like we had a good sample set of men to evaluate him against that year. I think that the first real insight we have into where Jeff was at in terms of the trajectory of the sport relative to the fittest in the world was 2021. And he finished 13th. And what I think everyone is in agreement with about Jeff Adler is that at the elite end of the sport, he is the closest thing we're probably ever going to find to what the methodology is all about, which is consistently improving over time. And so he goes from 13th to 5th to 1st in a 3-year time period, which is pretty impressive. I mean, really, really impressive. And obviously this last year's win was contingent on an injury with Roman and an unknown circumstance. One of those two guys was going to win either way. And so he was going to be at worst the second fittest guy there. And he ended up winning it. And injuries is a part of sport, and you can't take that away, anything away from what he did. And yeah, John said it, I think, perfectly. I'm recognizing the greatness of Adler, but it's similarly to when I have, after the 2022 season, I took a lot of heat for keeping Madero 7th on the all-time rankings with 2 wins. Then he comes back next year and he has a 13th place. And suddenly it looks a little bit, that ranking of 7th and not being so hasty to push him up into the top echelon seems a little bit more practical. And so sometimes you just need to let it play out over time. In this case, I don't have any time. The era is over. The stats are the stats. It's all that it is. And so, yeah, I just basically choose to reward Fikowski, Olson, and BKG, who've not only made it every single year during this time period, they have been consistently good or excellent during that time period.
John, anything to say on that?
No, I mean, I think we're in agreement on that. But I've seen, like, Jeff was half of the era, if not like a little. If you're going to count 2019, like a little more than half of that, right? Barely more than half of the era. And so I don't count it as like he's a one-hit wonder. Like, he's been around. He's been fifth, 2 times 5th place, and then 1st place. That first place in 2023. If Noah's second came in any other year, I would probably rank Noah higher than where I do have him, but it's not. It's in 2019. And like, if you look at BKG's 2 best years, arguably his best year period. So group those 2 are 2019 and 2020. It's arguable. I get it.
BKG?
But like yeah.
No, they're not his 2 best years, dude.
No, 2-year period together. Like, so if you want to take 2017,
2 years
2018,
previous to that was 5th and 5th.
I know 3rd and 8th. I think 3rd and 8th is better than 5th and 5th. You don't?
Not based on average finish.
Okay, well then average finish, you're not making the podium. I'll take 3rd and 8th all day, every day over 5th and 5th. You want real life circumstance? What do you get? You get a 2-year period.
Yeah, I mean, look, like I said, Noah Olson and BKG, they have that podium finish in 2019. It's their only podium finish during the era, but it's not that crazy compared to several of the other finishes. Besides the second, Noah has a 4th, a 6th, and a 4th. BKG has a 5th, a 4th, a 5th, and a 5th. So like, maybe it's 1 to 3 spots better than they would have done.
Yeah, but it's not like getting lucky. It's not getting lucky with the programming different. It's like the guys that beat them are fitter. You know what I'm saying? Like, there's a different tier of fitness.
And you think Adler has it?
Yeah, 100. He won.
Yeah, but I would say
the fittest man in the world.
But then I would have to say that Roman has it too.
He is. But Roman's only competed 2 years, unless you want to count 2020. He hasn't won. He's only competed 2 years. Winning, dude, I have Roman at 9th, and I have Adler at 5th. Like, that's the difference between winning and not winning, is 4 spots.
Right, and I have them 7th and 8th, and I think that it's less of a difference. So that's, and I think that's a summary of the conversation, is that John places a massive emphasis on the win, and a lot of other people do too. And I don't discount the wins, but I do value the totality of an excellent resume over time. Do
you know what the wins mean? Like, when you win, it means you're fitter. And so, like, yeah, you have longevity, yes, but if one guy is 5 of the 7 years and the other guy's 7,
why keep Adler?
But this guy's fitter.
Why keep Adler below Fikowski?
Because Fikowski's all 7 out of 7, and he's had multiple podiums, and they came in the years that were not the weird years. If you count 2019, 2020 are Fikowski's worst years. Same for Bellner, I think.
Actually,
right?
2022 was worse than 2020 for him.
Well, 16th.
Well, I'm going to say I'm going to have to side on John with this. When it comes down to it, we are talking about the Madison era. And when you look back at the whole era as a whole, what's the most memorable thing is wins. So with that, I'm going to have to side with John on that. Sorry, Brian. But anyways, you're only 2 spots away anyways. So moving on, let's talk about that top 5 though. So going into the top 5, you as you mentioned, Brian, you mentioned Brent Fikowski. You have as your 5th pick, and we already talked about Adler at 5th.
Can you explain BKG being at 4? Because I have Fikowski at 4, right?
Let's move in. That's exactly. We'll move on to the 4 because that's exactly where we're getting at here. So, John, you have BKG at 6, and Brian has him valued at 4. Brian, why?
Yeah, I mean, BKG's trajectory during this time period was more linear than most of the athletes. He didn't really have a bad year. He didn't miss any years. He never got cut from the competition. The worst thing that happened to him was this past season where he couldn't participate in the lifting. He took basically 0 points on that, and that prevented him from being in the top 10 for like, I don't know, 10 years in a row or whatever streak that he has. So his worst finish came in this past season. It was 11th, and it was partially due to injury, which happens, of course. Directly comparing with Brent Fikowski, Brent does have the best finish of the two, 2nd place in 2017. They both have a podium finish. Brent's was in 2021, which John will certainly way higher than BKG's in 2019, and don't fault him for that. And Brent had a great bounce back season last year, finishing 4th. I do. But you know, but again, we're just gonna, if you go to the other end of the spectrum, and it's, you know, the 23rd and 15th, similarly to Vellner, 16th and 19th from 2019 and 2020 are laughable. They're not relevant representations of their fitness in those time periods, and it's really difficult to know what to do with those things. It's the 16th place that I look at in 2022, which was, I think, just as confusing to Brent as it is to me about what happened there. And that balances out the difference in some of those top finishes, the third, whatever, is that BKG's never had a year like that. He's never had a year where I've had to scratch my head, or anyone who tuned into the games was like, what happened to this guy? And his average finish is as good as anyone else.
And that's why you have BKG ahead of Brent Fikowski, because he's never had a year like that.
He's consistently good every single year.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can I make a rebuttal argument?
Of course.
All right. They're both 7 for 7, right? So it's neither of them are longevity. They both were out there in Madison the whole entire time. Fikowski has 2 podiums to BKG's 1, and his 1 is in the worst year to be a podium winner, or the least valuable year, I guess you want to call it. Every single year, Fikowski beats BKG. If you do not count 2019 and 2020, it's 4-1. And that's the 1 year that you're saying Fikowski is less than BKG. And they were 16th to 9th. There were 7 spots. And Fikowski, he's a home run hitter of an athlete. Just by being the nature of 6'2", that makes you less inconsistent than being 5'10". I don't know. And then you take away 2019, 2020. Do you know what their average placement finishes are? Brent's a lot higher. No, it's 5.8 to 6.8. And then you go event wins. It's 5 wins to 1 event win. There is no world where BKG is better than Brent Fikowski in the Madison era.
But John, you're using arguments that you've already used the antithesis argument for. You don't value Guimayeros' event wins, but you
every single event win was a strength event. Yeah, I value it different. Fikowski's events are very random.
And you don't and you're saying he's beaten him every time, but you don't care that Ben Smith beat Alex Anderson every time. So you're using these arguments.
For 2 years? Yeah, he's beaten him every time for 7 years.
No, not 7 years.
I'm not counting throughout a 7-year period, unless you want to count 2019 and 2020. And if you value that more, then BKG's your guy.
And clearly he is.
I don't value 2019 and 2020, him being better than Fikowski. Fikowski's been better every step of the way. He's been the podium in 2017 and then the podium in 2021 by itself should put him above BKG. By itself.
Yeah, and so it's once again, our arguments are pretty linear with the way that we've been going about our rankings throughout the entire thing, which is nice.
And then you get really hypocritical when it gets to 2 and 3. Because if our arguments are the same throughout this whole entire time, right? Then Justin Medeiros should be number 2. And instead, Patrick Vellner's number 2 for you, right?
You're moving ahead.
I think that's consistent with what I've done throughout. But Patrick, wrap us up on the previous. Take John's side again.
I actually will take John's side on this, even though he did say he weighs wins over consistency, and one reason why he's picking Fikowski on this is based on his consistency and not necessarily his wins, but it's because Fikowski doesn't have any wins. So I'm gonna side with John, even though he has kind of like, I don't know, backtracked on some of his comments on it. Not too much, but it all depends on the athlete, essentially.
You'd have picked Brent ahead of BKG too. That's what you're saying.
Yes, essentially, yes. So let's move on to the top 3. We won't even talk about one right now because here's probably the biggest. This again, it comes down to consistency versus wins when we talk about the top 3 picks or top 3 and 2. So Brian has Justin Medeiros, 2-time fittest man on earth, at 3. John has him at 2 on his list, and he has Vellner at 3, and Brian has Vellner at 2. So, John, you open it up.
Okay. Whenever I'm not talking about the Fikowski thing, you're right. What I meant by you're being inconsistent. You have Roman over Sam, and you have Lazar over Cole. And using that same logic, Justin should be ahead of Vellner. Same logic. Less years, better performance. The only difference is Justin won 2 of those years, beat everybody in the world. So his placement should be even more over what Roman is over Sam and what Lazar is over Cole Sager. That's what I meant by
including Vellner.
Right. But that's what I'm saying. Because you have those 2 guys because their performances was better, but we kind of glossed over them because we were talking about other stuff. But Cole Sager's been super, super consistent the whole entire 7 years. Sam Quant's depending on his respiratory illness, he's consistent. And you have Roman and Lazar over those 2 guys, even though they're consistent throughout the whole entire time. It's not just a 3-year period of greatness. Why would you not argue the same here with Justin and Vellner?
Again, I think that, that's actually tough to say that, but the 13th in 2023 is confusing to me. It's the worst performance in the way that I evaluate it of any of them out of the, 11 that we have to choose from. If you want to discount 2019 and 2020 in this case, it hurts Justin. It helps Pat. I think that a lot of people know this kind of the stories around Pat those 2 years. In 2020, he was doing it with a torn groin. He had 3 terrible finishes on the 3 squatting workouts, pretty good finishes otherwise. And I'm grateful that he didn't make the top 5 because he didn't need to do that in that condition. And you look at just the other 5 normal years, 3rd, 2nd, 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 6th. It's pretty damn good. No wins. And why didn't he win? I mean, it's tough, right? Yeah,
because of Justin Medeiros.
Well,
that's
because
why
of Matt Fraser.
Win.
Because of Matt Fraser.
I know, but nobody would win.
Else.
Nobody would win for Matt Fraser.
I know.
You and me have talked about this
Justin
at
had
length.
competed a few years earlier, then he wouldn't have had those wins either. Or if Matt had decided to compete a couple extra years, then he wouldn't have those wins either. I'm not discounting the fact that Justin won 2 years. I'm not discounting the fact that he beat Pat in those 2 years. But in those 2 years, he beat him by a combined 7 spots. Pat beat him by 11 spots this year. 10 spots if you think the Roman would have beat Pat on a healthy foot. And so I'm just looking at it similar with Jason Hopper, and I'm saying I can't just ignore the 13th. I can't just ignore the 31st. I can't just ignore the 16th from Fikowski in 2022 when these athletes are so good and the margins are so small. I'm not only valuing their top end performance, I have to consider every year that they showed up. And when they had the full opportunity to do it and they were worse by a considerable margin than the guy that I'm comparing them to, that means something to me too.
Why does winning not mean anything?
No, winning.
Beating the guy that we're talking about. We're comparing these 2 guys, and Justin has beaten Pat 3 of 4 years. If you don't want to count 2020, 2 of 3 years.
Yes, true.
Why does that not count for anything? When
It
they
does
are in a
count for something.
competition
It does count.
together.
It does count for something, but I also consider your worst performance. I also consider the totality of the era. And it's not Justin's fault that he wasn't there for all 7 years, but he wasn't. And Pat was. And he
You
was
don't
the third
consider
fittest
Pat
guy when the era
16th?
started. I do consider Pat 16th. I do consider his 9th. I see them there. I understand what those numbers mean compared to the 13th. They're not as bad. They're understandable. They're not even they're not the same measurement of fitness. We know that in those years in 2019 and 2020, that Pat Vellner was winning Wadapaloozas, winning Rogue Invitationals, challenging Matt Fraser at the Rogue Invitational, going toe-to-toe with Fikowski and Roman in Dubai. Like, he was one of the best guys in the sport that year, just like he was every other year. The games were the problem that year, not Vellner. You know that.
No, I agree. I also know that
there was
2021 and 2022, Patrick Vellner, we both thought would win the CrossFit Games.
I thought that 2021 was his best chance, and he came up one spot short, and he lost to Medeiros, and I give Medeiros credit for that 100%.
And not just barely, like handedly.
No, it's actually.
You can say you dogged the last performance all you want. You can say you dogged the last event, but you did. You know, he wasn't going to beat Justin in that event. Justin beat everybody.
He was never gonna beat Justin in that event, but he could have probably beat 5 other guys. He had no 50
points instead of 80 points.
He had no chance of beating Justin, and no one had any chance of catching him. So there was no point in him doing anything other than that. You have to look back at other points of the competition, and Vellner made mistakes like he makes every year at the games. He should be good on his hands. He failed like 8 attempts on the handstand walk obstacle course that year. It cost him a ton of points. He missed 1 clean. Maybe he was going to shit his pants. I don't know, but that allowed Justin to pass him. Those are critical points. So you can, the margin of points is irrelevant. A win, right? But it was greater than it probably was on paper if you actually look back at some of those things.
Even if you tried, though, it was never in doubt, is what I'm saying. It's not like it was a race.
No, and look, I wrote an article after. I wrote an article. It was a race. It was absolutely a race. But there was a turning point in the race, and then Pat made a mistake on top of that, and Justin had his 2-year stretch in 21 and 22. I wrote an article about this when Patrick and I were working for Bar Bend last year, detailing every performance that Justin had over those 2 years. It was the best execution and maximization of potential in the 2-year stretch of anyone, maybe ever, on the men's side. It was so impressive. I don't know what happened to him last year, and I can't ignore it.
Those bike wrecks got him, man.
There might be a legitimate explanation. There might not be. I have no idea. No one's been able to provide me anything. But when I look at it, I can't ignore that he's had 3 opportunities to compete in a full season or a full CrossFit Games against the field. I'm not taking away the 2020, but I value that as like a 10th place finish.
Sure. No, three opportunities to go against the whole field. And in 2 of those opportunities, he beat every single person.
Best to ever do it in terms of his potential versus his performance, and a total mystery to me. And I look at the other guy and I say, he came in as he was a rookie in 2016, but he comes back in 2017, backs it up with a podium finish. So at the start of the era, he's the 3rd best guy. And as the era's progressed and the men have gotten better and better over the entire thing, he leaves the era as the 2nd best guy. I would say he's probably still the 3rd best guy. So he's just as good at the end of the era as he was at the beginning. He's never had a year like Justin had this year that was that bad. And that's where my decision came down to.
Because Justin's had a bad year.
Yeah, you can't just ignore it.
So if Justin was say Justin was like 6th,
I would have him ahead of Pat.
All right. Well, I think a normal Justin under normal circumstances, and I get it. Injuries are part of the game. Your argument still holds water. Your pick where you have him still holds water. But you give him, he was last place in that event too. He was last place in event 2. Like, you give him 80 points, like a normal finish for him. He's 7th.
What workout was that?
I'm talking the workout where he didn't do anything. Event 2, the one right after the bike.
Pig chipper. Yeah. A lot of people struggled with that.
No, but he wasn't there. Like his spirit left his body in that workout.
I know there were a lot of athletes. It was great. The turnaround from the ride to the pig chipper was really tight, and a lot of athletes were not able to recover. Their quads were not able to recover from that bike ride. And whatever happened to him on the bike ride, whether it was because of but crashes or whatever else, yeah, he was certainly one of those, maybe the worst. But, like I said, in other years, Vellner's made mistakes. Vellner's had bad performances, and it's mitigated his chances against him. This comment from Nico, absolutely. I addressed this in the beginning of the show. I said that we wouldn't really factor in with those things for the most part, but that in some cases they are things that John and I are considering. Like when we evaluate Ricky Garrard, we know based on everything that he's done over the last 18 months how good this guy is. And yes, he's only had one appearance at the CrossFit Games, but we don't consider it a fluke. I do consider the 2019 and 20 games a fluke in Pat's finishing rankings, because I know that during that time period he was still one of the best in the world. And so that point was only to articulate that the programming and the structure of the seasons is what was weird, not Pat's performances.
Okay, I want to clear up some of these comments real quick. Can I do that?
I'll get to those, John. I just want to get one final comment to Nico here. So what Nico's saying is that he thinks Dak Prescott is a better QB than Jalen Hurts, is what he's saying.
You had to do that. Of course, you had to just do that.
All right, here, this one's for you, John.
All right, so Barkley. So if this was the case, I probably would put Pat second under Fraser. But that means there was another year that Justin didn't beat everybody. And like I think it's a 3-year period if we don't count 2020. In 2 of those 3 years, Justin's the best person in the whole entire world. If it's a 4-year period and half the time he's 10th and half the time he's first and Pat's second 100% of the time, then I would pick Pat. But since it's only a 3-year period, we don't have that other year. I just think what Justin has done in the Madison era is a more impressive feat than what Pat has done. That's all I'm saying. And for the record, I think Pat is fitter than Justin. I wanted Pat to win. I still think he's fitter than Justin, but he can't swim and he can't bike. And for those reasons, Justin beats him. And it's like, and then he has the weird mistake that he always makes. But if we're going longer out in the Madison era, for instance, I think if they both go 2 more years, then Pat will have, he's better in the Madison era. But since it's just those 4 years, Justin's been better 3 of the 4 years. And 2 of those years, he was better than everybody in the whole entire world. I can't, in my mind, that was worth more to me than just being there and being one of the best ones every year, but you never win.
Fair enough. And
I'm with you on that. Ironically fit. I agree. I think Pat will be 4th and Justin will be 5th. That's what I think will happen.
Love it.
I think strong arguments on both sides. Very difficult choice. Yeah. John and I actually talked about these 2 guys before we made our picks as a case study, and I knew that he would take the other side on this one, and I was happy about it. It's a great like microcosm of the whole conversation that we've been having, is that how do you what do you value when you're trying to do something like this? And obviously there's no exact science, and it's fun, and the main objective is to really give credit to and acknowledge the incredible achievements of every man who's on this list or was even considered for it. But Patrick will end up siding with John again on this one.
I will. And again, that's incredibly feats. And talk about incredible feats. Me agreeing with John for so much during this
argument
segment,
over and over.
Yeah, it is. It's almost the LeBron, Michael Jordan, type thing. But anyways, let's go to number 1. Obviously a no-brainer on this, but my question for you 2 is, there's no argument, especially on the men's side, that Matt Fraser is the most dominant male individual CrossFit Games athlete. However, in light of what we've seen in the recent years since Matt stepped away, do we see anything in the near future where we will see someone as dominant as Matt? Maybe someone that wins like 4 in a row, or do you think because the field is so good after Matt left that we're going to have different champions, or probably someone that doesn't run like 2 in a row?
I mean, you give Austin Hatfield a couple years. We'll see what happens. I'm just kidding. I'm not going to say never, because when Rich
That's why I
Froning
said
retired,
I say
we said
within
we
the
never-
last 10 years, like next 5 to 10 years.
yeah, I don't think that person is currently with us. Like, I don't think we currently know who that person is. We thought there would never be another Rich Froning, and then Matt Fraser. 2014 was the first time we ever saw Matt Fraser. We're like, oh my freaking God, who is this? And
some people saw him in 2013 at the East Regional, and he had a couple of really, really like attention-getting performances there. Comes to 2014, and everybody knows who he is. As he was, closest one to dethroning Rich that year, and then 2016 onward, it's all history. The guy never lost a competition after 2016. And I think there were a few people that maybe misunderstood what these rankings were. Rich Froning's not eligible for these rankings, as he never competed as an individual during this time period. And Matt Fraser's 4 for 4 during the time period with, I think one of the like, we've been here and there, we've mentioned event wins, which is like kind of a one-off stat. Maybe average event finish over the time period is probably a better reflection of their overall
I
fitness.
think so. I think, yeah.
But event wins still weighs heavily because they're memorable, they're iconic, and they can be used to measure thing. And in this era, in only 4 years, Fraser won 26 events. List them all on the article that I wrote if you were interested in which events he won. Vellner won 7. Adler won 6, Roman won 5, Geese won 5. Those are the only guys with 5 or more during that time period. Yes.
Will you give me $50 if I can name all 26?
Don't show him.
We're not.
Not on air, but off air, I maybe will take you up on that.
You might take me a little bit. I got to roll through all the events.
But it's important. It's important to just to recognize that like the greatness that he exuded during this era was separate and different than anyone else, and it's the reason why Patrick asked a question like that. I think currently, and John and I hope we'll have several conversations about this throughout the year. By the way, this picture is insane. Great find there, Patrick.
The Vellner picture is pretty great too. I mean, that's a hard picture to beat.
It's an iconic one.
It is, but I've seen it before. I've never seen this picture before. So I don't know if you did the colors or something, like it caught my eye in a different way. Yeah. Anyway, right now I think that the state of the landscape for the men is actually totally different than it's ever been. John and I would probably both agree that there are 4 or 5 guys that if you told us they're competing this week healthy, they're going to do 8 events. We don't know what any of the events are. And 3 days later, you told us this person had won, and you said 1 of 5 names. We wouldn't be surprised. Like, we'd be like, yeah, I could see a scenario where that guy could win. I've never thought that before. I thought either Fraser or Froning was going to win. Even in the year that Ben Smith won, I would have taken Fraser every day of the week. Like, I thought for sure those are going to, like, you're not beating Froning, and then you're not beating Fraser. If you want to have a conversation after that, so be it. But right now, we have this parity to the degree where there's 4 or 5 guys that could win any given weekend. And so to John's point, I have to completely agree. If that guy is out there that could do it in the next 5 to 10 years, we haven't seen him yet.
Yeah. And I think, like you guys said, that guy would have to be someone who's fairly young. And right now that, if you have to look at that, it'd be Justin's only 24 years old. And then someone like Dallin Pepper, who's fairly young as well. And I just don't see that happening with either one of those. That's what makes Justin, what he accomplished in those 2 years, such an amazing thing. Like, like Brian, like John said, I mean, we can't discount that. And I don't think we're going to see someone that wins back-to-back titles in the next 5 years.
The other thing that I'm really curious about, because we've never seen this on the men's side, and I guess we've never seen it on the women's side either, is someone win and then lose and then come back and win. And we still won't see it on the women's side because no one beat Tia last year. She just didn't compete because she was pregnant. But there is the potential, and this would be interesting, John, if Justin wins again next year.
I don't think he will.
I know, but if he did that, he'd be the first person to do that.
Yeah,
and then we would have a kind of a new kind of a scenario. Like, let's just paint a scenario where by the time he retires, he's won 5 titles, but it was over 10 years. And how does that compare to a Rich Froning or a Matt Fraser? Yeah, well, it'd be different. It'd be, it'd be like
the Bulls versus Ferris dynasty. The Bulls dynasty is way better. It's not close.
Yeah. I think when we look back at it, we're going to look at 2022 when Justin Medeiros did against that level of competition. That includes Vellner, Fikowski, Ricky, BKG, and Roman, and we're going to look at that win as pretty impressive, because I think the next games champion is going to come out of that batch. The next couple games champions will probably come out of that batch. The only exception might be someone like a Dallin Pepper, or even a Jason Hopper might jump in there. Who knows?
Oh,
But
yeah, it's not the wrong names.
or an Austin Hatfield, whatever.
Like, what
But
I think is
anyways.
going to happen, I think Roman's going to win the next 2 years. And the stuff that keeps happening with Roman's going to keep on happening. And just everybody's going to start getting against Roman. And he's going to end up turning into a villain. And then it's going to be a real life Ivan Drago Rocky situation. And the good old boy from West Virginia is going to finally get developed enough to take it back to America. And I think that's what's going to happen in the next 3 years.
Patrick, pull up Mary Mansour's comment says question there, since you dealt with this yesterday.
Yeah. So yeah, while I was looking for images, it's like one of the funnest things I do. I think that's one reason why Brian keeps me around, is because I can hunt down these photos. And what I was trying to do, if you saw this image here, you see these guys in the white jerseys here. And for the life of me, I cannot remember if Vellner has ever worn a white jersey. And I don't think he has.
One's always so bad. Like,
exactly.
You can't get lucky one year.
Yeah, exactly. That's why you always see someone like Christy Aramo, Koski, they wear the white jerseys. And I think, Pat, and I'm pretty sure I'm probably 100% on this, that he's never worn the white jersey at the games due to that fact.
That picture of BKG is insane.
But you have someone like Adrian Mundweiler who has worn the white jersey at one point. A Koski, I'm trying to think I think that was Koski. Who wore in 2021?
It would have been Koski.
Was it Koski? Okay. And then, same with BKG, which is cool. I'm dealing with athletes, I know, talking to like some of the Mayhem Independence people, they're pretty happy with that. They got to wear that white jersey for one event. And, it's a cool thing to have, at one point. And then you look at the women's field last year, when it went from Emma Lawson to Alexis Raptis to Laura to, it just kept on trading places. I mean, I think ultimately that's what we want to see.
Who do you think is the most obscure person that has worn the white jersey?
Well, you have to. I'm trying to remember what year the white jersey started.
Yeah, and you could probably
would it be? Do you think? What's her name? The boat. I'm drawing a blank. Her name.
Is it Anna Tunnicliffe?
Yeah, maybe Anna.
I don't think she ever did. She never won the event. Like, her and Holty were close. Holty might have, but Holty beat her in most of the time.
Well, Halpin said Haley Adams wore it in 2022.
That's not that obscure.
I know, but just throwing it out there.
When did Anna Tobias wear? Oh, you're saying Anna Tunnicliffe? Yeah, it's Tunnicliffe. When though?
I just don't like, in 2014, did they have leaders jerseys yet? Because if they did, then Tobias and Jordan Troyan would have been wearing it.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know. But
Jordan Troyan never did, because
I don't think they had him that year.
He was in an orange shirt. Yeah.
I feel like the leader jerseys didn't pop up until like the final day, it seems like.
Anyway,
yeah.
John's got training to get to, so we're gonna wrap it up. John's training for the what are you training for, John?
5K.
The CrossFit Games, man.
You don't have a competition coming up?
Oh, I guess I'm doing the physics experience, but I'm not training for that. That's just something that's happening.
Part of training. I'm gonna come down there and watch you compete.
Do it, man.
I'm gonna be cheering for you on the sidelines.
I'm really hoping I can finish
unless you're in the
final back of the run.
Have they announced the workouts?
Mm-mm. No.
Maybe there won't be a run.
I'm gonna be really upset if there's not.
That's like these guys that are like, I made the games. All right, coach, let's get in the pool. Got to start swimming. Let's hit the open water. 2023, no swimming. They're just like,
it's cool.
But if you listen to Rich, it'll make you better at everything else too. So
yeah,
just keep swimming, just because a lot of competitions didn't have them this year. Anyway, overall, I think the biggest takeaway is the Madison Era of the CrossFit Games was complex. There was 2 amazing years. There was 2 kind of weird years, and then we kind of built towards what I would say the last 2 years were also, really, really good. High caliber athletes across the board. Seriously, if we mentioned your name on this show, you're a savage. You're a beast. You have done amazing things during this time period, and you've provided entertainment and inspiration for people all around the world. It's fun. It's fun for me to do these with John. As I mentioned, we have different approaches and perspectives, lifestyles, and opportunities to dissect this stuff, but we both care a lot about it. We try to represent the athletes really well. I think at this point we're pretty comfortable, taking other side of the arguments. I don't, it's funny in the comments, and I know Patrick set it up this way with his kind of question. They're like, John takes the win on this one, Brian takes the win on this one. Like, I don't necessarily like view it that way. I just think that it's different ways to appreciate greatness in the sport that we love. And when it comes down to it, I think that John also paid
Barbershop talk.
I think John paid Patrick to take his side on 4 out of the 5 debates today. So
you don't know how much money I have on paying then.
Exactly. I mean, wow. I mean, you found my Venmo and got 50 cents in there or something. I don't know. But hey, John, if in serious, if you guys want to get strong, I'm talking like strong, you need to get over to JY Barbell Club. I'm not, I mean, I've heard nothing but good reviews about it. Me personally, I don't need to get any stronger because I'm pretty strong myself, but I got the t-shirt to back that up. But anyways, if you are looking to get strong, John, go ahead. I'm giving you this your opportunity to pitch yourself.
Yeah, I mean, you did a good job at it, man. I feel like if they want it, they'd hear it every podcast. So it's JY Barbell Club. Just hit me up on Instagram and we'll get rocking. Patrick, did you say you ran a 19-minute 5K the other day?
Yeah, like 3 years ago.
That's awesome, man. I'm so jealous of you.
I used to be a runner. I mean, for the Army, I used to have to run a lot. So, and then Fat Pat started just popping up, but anyways. But another thing, again, we want to say thanks to John, senior analyst for the Sevon podcast and the Barbell Spin. So, thanks for joining us. If you want to read Brian's article, we have it in 3 parts on our website, and we appreciate everyone coming out. John, let's do this again next week. Same time next week.
For sure. We're doing the girls.
Talk about the ladies.
Yeah, so women will be next week. We'll be fairly quiet over the New Year's weekend. Hope everyone has a great and safe time, whatever they choose to do. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday next week, you can be looking for the top 30 women to come out in the same order. Again, those will be my individual rankings. Those are there to just give you guys some context of who we're talking about. John has already submitted his 30 as well. Neither one of us has seen the other list, and we'll do the same thing on Thursday with Patrick has the list. He's the only one with side-by-side comparison on Instagram. Please, if you guys get a chance to throw some comments, questions, your opinions. We have thick skin and we don't mind. Sometimes you guys illuminate different things, and a lot of times Patrick and I are looking at those questions and kind of planning some of this stuff based on that. So if you're just as interested in the women, check it out next week, and we'll be back Thursday for that as well.
Oh, hey, before we go, Nico with some insider information here. BKG had the jersey. CrossFit just made a mistake in counting and gave it to Koski, who actually tried to refuse wearing it before the 10-1 thrusters and wall walks workout event. There we go.
Trivia, John. Great. That's a great and true statement from Nico. Trivia, John. Yeah. Male and women winner of thruster wall walk that year.
Mal O'Brien and Scott Panchik.
That's why I keep them around, guys.
Yeah, it is. Hey, again, to Kathy. Hey, Kathy, if you are interested in the Barbell Club, it is remote. He does remote coaching. So just, slide in his DMs, his JY Barbell Club DMs, not his JohnYoung.CrossFit DMs.
I mean, you can give me it either or. I'm not as popular.
Oh, okay. Here, I was trying to help you out.
It don't matter. I'll answer that you do.
If I ever have a period of time where I'm going to be in the same place for 3 months in a row, I will do JY Barbell Club.
I tried it. Yeah, you're so busy.
It's not like I'm training. It's inconsistent, and I don't know if I'll have consistent enough access to barbells and weights regularly to do that the way that it's supposed to be done.
Yeah,
for now.
Well, for all those who are playing fantasy football, this is championship weekend. Good luck to everyone. and whether you're, I know John is.
All of us
Brand-
are in at least one championship.
yeah, at least one championship. So, but so good luck to everybody. And yeah, with that being said, thanks for joining us today. As always, a pleasure, John, Brian, and be friendly, our friends.
Okay, thanks, guys.